So now we continue with our second session. We'll be looking at the training system for employment in Japan. Our speaker will be Hiroyuki Nagumo-san, together with Mr. Yoshida-san. Mrs. Pilar Carot will introduce the speakers. Mr. Nagumo is the president of the Japan International Labor Foundation. Thank you very much, Mr. Nagumo. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to congratulate the Tripartite Foundation for this very interesting day, and I would also like to thank Casa Aisha for their important contribution. And I would like to thank all of those who've made this meeting possible. As you all know, we live in a world that's increasingly globalized. That's why it is so important to know exactly how vocational training for employment is organized in other countries. What's most important and interesting about this meeting is that we've invited the leaders in the different countries in these areas. It is a privilege to welcome Mr. Hiroyuki Nagumo, someone who has such an extensive experience in the area. To give you an idea, in the early 90s, he joined the Executive Commission of the Utility Trade Union in Tokyo. After working there for 18 years, in top position in October 2009, he was appointed Secretary General of the Confederation of Japanese Workers. Since December 2013, he is the chairman of the International Labor Foundation in Japan, an organization that has been promoting exchanges and international cooperation in the area for the past 20 years, implementing programs that strengthen and develop a free and democratic labor movement in developing countries. Quoting Mr. Nagumo himself, we have a very interesting program there, the invitation program. Young trade union leaders from developing countries are trained in Japan, are invited to receive training in Japan so that when they return to their countries, they may be perfectly qualified to promote the development of the trade union movement, improving workers' conditions. To give you some figures, a total of 2,656 people have registered in this program from 126 different countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Pacific area, including Oceania. Our speaker, therefore, is a qualified expert on the situation of training in Japanese companies. But what's more, he's also one of the stakeholders in social dialogue and knows a lot about the role of the different social partners in these processes. So we'll be hearing a lot about their contribution to social dialogue, and we'll be able to compare the social dialogue in Japan to that in Spain. As you all know, we are now in a process of change. Changes are being implemented in Spain. We have a recent royal decree that regulates training for employment. After long months of negotiation, we haven't managed to obtain the agreement of social partners, as is usually the case in Spain. So we are sure that your presentation will be tremendously interesting, and I'm going to give the floor to you, Mr. Hiroyuki Nagumo. Good morning, and thank you very much for your invitation. My name is Hiroyuki Nagumo. I would like to thank you for your kind words of introduction. I don't really know if my presentation will be up to your expectations, but I'll do my best. You've heard that I've been working for the electricity workers trade union for a number of years, and now I am the chairman of the Japan International Labor Foundation. I have devoted a lot of time to the trade union movement. I mean, I've been actually involved in trade union movements for many, many years. And I believe that perhaps we can talk at length about this during the Q&A. It's quite complicated the way this has been arranged because I'm speaking Japanese, I'm being translated into Spanish, and then the Spanish translation is being translated into English. So it's not the easiest way of doing things. So I'll try to speak slowly. The links between Japan and Spain are long-standing links. I mean, we're talking about 460 years of exchanges. And we're talking about a very friendly relationship. In 1878, Japan sent a trade mission to Spain led by Tamoni Irakura. And they visited Europe to find out more about their systems. And based on that, they tried to deploy a modern economic and political system in Japan. Recently, in 2011, on March the 11th, we had that terrible earthquake that has caused tremendous damage in the Tohoku area. And we have felt truly supported by you, something I am very grateful for your words of support and your actions. After the nuclear power plant accident, a lot of efforts are being deployed to deal with the different issues we have there. And the region is working very hard to reconstruct the area. So, having said that, I'll be referring to the subject matter of this meeting. I have some PowerPoint slides where you'll find some information. I'd like to start by introducing my organization, the JILAF. The Japan International Labor Foundation was created in 1989 by the Japanese Confederation of Trade Unions, RENGO. Its objective is to promote free and democratic trade unionism in developing countries, as we said before, and to support developing countries in their social and economic development. It is funded by the Japanese government. So 66% of the funds come from the Japanese government. The remaining percentage is contributed by different organizations such as the Trade Union Confederation. So now I'll be referring to the workers' education program or activities. We have an invitation program I mentioned before in passing. We invite workers to come to Japan. We invite union leaders from all over the world to Japan, and we offer them opportunities to learn about Japanese trade unionism, common labor practices, industrial relations, and so on and so forth. And then we have a local support program, mainly in Asian countries. We organize seminars and workshops for the development of constructive labor relations, Japanese style. And now I have some photographs for you, illustrating some of these programs. We see now a team from Latin America, another one from Nepal and Bangladesh. And then on the bottom left corner, we see a photograph of a local support program we organized in Cambodia. And then on the right bottom corner, we have a picture of a seminar we organized in Pakistan. And then we have a social development program. Its acronym is SGRA. This is an activity that supports the informal sector. With the support of the government, the employers' association, and the trade unions that organize support activities to improve the working conditions of those working in the informal sector. And then we also offer basic education to children who work, child labor. So we see some examples here of this project, one in Thailand, the other one in Nepal, and then in Bangladesh. Vocational training we organized in Bangladesh. And then on the right-hand side, we have a photograph of a tripartite meeting. More pictures from Nepal, where we provide support to children who work. It is an informal school. And then two further pictures taken in India, where we also provide educational support to children. I'll be referring now to vocational training in Japan, the so-called OJT method. But before I do that, I'd like to say something about the economic situation in Japan and the situation of employment in Japan. Actual growth rate in 2012 amounted to 1.7%. In 2013, 1.6%. And growth was stable. However, in 2014, it was minus 0.1%. This has been the result of a sudden increase in demand. Wage increases were not in line with consumer price indexes because the yen was being depreciated, and therefore Japanese people have now a lower purchasing power. Actual salary in 2014 dropped by 0.25%. However, the situation of employment shows an upward trend, according to official statistics. As to the quality of employment, there are different problems here. In 2014, we have 3.6 of unemployment, 3.6%, and 3.4% this year. So the unemployment rate has improved. But there are still many problems regarding the employment quality, including a high unemployment rate amongst young people from 15 to 20 years of age. Youth unemployment. The second problem has to do with precarious employment. The number of employees, excluding managers, is 52,400,000. 19,620,000 are non-regular workers. As many as 37.4% of the total working population. Amongst these workers, women account for 67.9%, 13,320,000, and temporary workers, 9,580,000. Most of them are women, 8.5 million. The characteristics of these workers in Japan are the following. We're talking about people who have a short-term contract from 2 to 3 months and who get paid a very low salary. In Japan, we are losing population, so in the future we will have fewer available workers. And regarding the population from 15 to 64 years of age, we're talking about almost 8 million people. According to 2 figures in 2000, there were more than 8 million, 8.5 million people who could work. So 8.5 million as compared to 6 point something million today. According to our forecasts, by the year 2030, we will have lost more than 10 million workers. So we should continue to support economic growth in spite of the aging of the population, and therefore it is essential for us to strengthen our company's competitive edge and to continue to be able to offer a high added value. To meet our goals, we need highly qualified workers familiar with advanced technologies and with a lot of skills. It is our duty to train this kind of worker. And at the same time, we should continue to count on the elderly who have a lot of knowledge and expertise. And we also need to include women. The integration of women in the labor market continues to be an important objective. However, sometimes they require some kind of retraining to join the labor market. Temporary work is usually held by women who raise a family, and after raising their family, they go back to the labor market, and they may require some retraining. Most of them work part-time. It's very, very difficult for women to return to the labor market after raising their families as ordinary workers. And at the same time, women, after spending so many years out of the labor market, find themselves in a situation where they need some retraining because technology evolves at the speed of light. However, many of these women have university diplomas, and many of them were very well trained in the past. So we should be in a position to take advantage of their training, providing them with some retraining, promoting the presence of women in the labor market. In Spain, 98% of high school students finish their secondary education. Women account for 55% of university students, and men 50.9%. We have more women studying at the university than men. However, we have very few women who are actually part of the labor market. The percentage of women in top positions remains very low, 10.8%. In companies employing more than 10 workers, the larger the company, the smaller the percentage of women in top positions. Training is tremendously important for irregular workers, those who didn't have the chance to increase their skills, especially in technology. Large companies have large-scale training strategies. They have their own training departments, and they have their own investments in training. However, SMEs, which are the majority of companies in Japan, can't afford to devote these resources to training. Therefore, these companies require some outside help to train their human resources. The percentage of SMEs in Japan amounts to 99.7% of the total number of companies. 69.7% of workers in Japan are employed by an SME. I'll now be referring to the so-called on-the-job training in Japan. Internal training provided by companies to their workers at the place of work. So it's learning by doing. And then training provided outside of the company is called off-the-job training. In Japan, it is quite usual to provide employees with training, on-the-job training. Usually, people who are fresh out of the university are hired in April. And there's usually a basic training course offered to these new recruits outside of the place of work. And what's most common is to provide training to these new recruits on the job. So they're not looking for people who are actually qualified to perform a specific job from the very beginning. So this kind of practice in Japan is very much in line with the practices at the company. I mean, Japanese people tend to obey orders. And in exchange of that obedience, they had an open-ended labor contract, and they enjoyed many perks offered by the company. So workers had stability in their lives, provided they followed the company's rules and orders. And they could make an important contribution to the company's productivity. This on-the-job training or internal training has made an important contribution to the development of Japanese companies and to the growth of the Japanese economy. I'll give you an example, Toyota, a very wonderful example. Toyota provides a lot of training to their employees, and this is an essential requirement as far as Toyota goes for the growth and prosperity of the company. However, for the past 20 years, we're talking about 2 lost decades, we are starting to see changes in the Japanese model, which has been based on open-ended contracts. Personnel costs are considered to be an expense, and workers are increasingly forced to work long hours without any overtime, to the extent that many workers become ill because they're working just too much.
And there's a phenomenon called sweet shop, where the factory, in the factories, we show you results of surveys on internal training that have been done on training, basic training by the Ministry for Health, Employment and Welfare. Companies that consider internal training important are 19.8%, and those who come close to considering it important, 53.6%, total 73.4%. That proportion is increasing as regards or as compared to 5 years ago. However, as regards external training, there is a decrease as compared to 5 years ago. Training of employees that are not part of the personnel in companies, the companies that give importance to this type of training are 29.1%, and close to giving importance to this training, 48.2%, a total of 77.3%. And a lot of that's the rate of importance that's given to this type of training. As regards internal training, as regards external training, 13.5% give it importance, and those that come close to giving it importance are 6.5%. So that means that Japanese companies consider internal training important not just for their regular employees, but also employees that are not regular, and that trend is increasing. As regards human resource training of human resources, the percentage of companies that think that there are problems in the development of abilities in human resources is 75.9%. This increased as compared to 5 years ago. The most often quoted problem is lack of personnel that is devoted to training. And then the next problem is lack of time for training, 48.8%. And then a lot of people leave their job after training, 40%, and there's a lack of workers that can access the training, 24%, and then a lack of money to do training, 19.9%. The next slide shows the development of capacity and ability training. When they were asked whether this was responsibility of the company or the individual, 78.3% answered that the company decides. And that shows a small increase as compared to 75% in 2013. And there's a high level in any case. The answer that says that it's up to the worker, that is 21, accounts for 21%, which is a decrease as compared to 2013. On the other hand, when we talk about employees that are not regular employees of companies, the companies we consider that it's their responsibility, account for 64.9%, which is slightly lower than employees that are regular employers of the company. On the other hand, the answer, those who said that the workers should decide themselves, that answer accounts for a lower percentage. In accordance with the surveys that have been done in human resources that were done by the Japanese Institute for Employment, Work and Employment Policy and Training Policy, training that is the training involves individual assessment of performance at work, followed by internal planned systematic training, 69.9%, external training paid for by the company. And then for mid-level positions and young executives, the highest percentage is external training paid for by the company, and then motivation using the objective system. In the case of employees that are not regular employees, the highest percentage is associated with periodical interviews and internal non-systematic and not planned training. The difference between fixed employees and employees that are not fixed or regular, the big difference comes when it's applied to training that's not paid for by the company. 49% is the difference. This suggests the trend to avoid costly training, external training programs for employees that are not regular employees of the company. Problems associated with internal training. There is a lack. The problem we have is the lack of versatility. That means to say that internal training in a company is not necessarily or is not valid for another company because it's very company specific. On the other hand, we are now introducing results-orientated programs and plans, and people are not so eager to teach others at work because that requires an investment in time, and also the person who trains other people might, when the training period is finished, get less money or get a salary cut. And a lot of this leads to deterioration of human relations. And another problem is the development of IT, which contributes to making the problem worse. Transmission of techniques and abilities to take care of things is being affected as a result of a lack of adequate human relations. The habit of going for drinks, for instance, after work is losing ground. That is the traditional way, so to speak, of getting the younger, newer employees involved in their company. They used to go for drinks after work. In Japan, that used to happen. But today, young people don't like to have this kind of social activity outside of work. Japanese companies recruit new or used to recruit people and train them within the company with internal and external training programs. But with the new situation, the amount of workers that are required, the number of workers is not guaranteed. And that is why hiring has become very important. And when it comes to hiring new recruits, the qualifications of the new worker are taken into consideration. But when these people are hired halfway through their degree, the basic knowledge is important, and also the ability to adapt to the work, to the job. The next slide, we see vocational training in the public sector. Both the central administration and local administration offer training programs, vocational training programs, and they play a very important role in the public sector. There's a reserve or a series of employees that are in deprived situation, and a lot of manual workers have a job to find it hard to get another job as a result mainly of lack of vocational training. I want to talk about the dual system in the Japanese style. It's a system that is new for training, for vocational training, where young people learn as they work and work as they learn. And specifically, it consists of practical training in companies and theoretical training in the classroom. Theoretical training has to do with the activity that the worker does at the company. This dual system includes two types of training courses to adapt to the desired professions. One includes two courses that are done at the schools, like the general school, for the development of professional capacities, which has the status of a university. And the other one is a 6-month course within the Centers for the Development of Capacities for Professional Training. The first course is very short, but for two courses you have to pay 390,000 yen. But the rate of employment after this training is 95%, and there is state financing, loans for studying, with an annual interest of 2.93%. In this general school for the development of capacities in the Kanto region, production technology, energy power control, IT, and architecture are offered as subjects. After 2 years of specialization, there is a possibility of enlarging those studies for another 2 years, after which the students could get a title which is the equivalent to the graduates from the Polytechnic School. This system was created by a public body which is called Center for the Creation of Jobs for Older People, Disabled People, and people with difficulties in finding employment. We have 10 national schools right now, these characteristics, and these schools offer general support for older people, but also disabled people, people that are looking for work, and employers. In order to provide work and to promote or develop the improvement of provisional abilities for workers. The promotion centers for the promotion and development of professional training offer courses in electricity, welding, information, management of information, computer-assisted design, and training for caregivers. There is professional training for older people and disabled people. This organization for the support of older people and disabled people organizes the training courses and also does research into the industry. There are schools for disabled people where professional training is given, and if there are a series of schools at national level, and then the type of professional training is being diversified for these people, and these courses are organized by NGOs and by private bodies. And also there is training support for job seekers. Job seekers who do not get supplementary benefit or unemployment benefit are trained professionally through the Office for Employment Office. They might also get a financial aid monthly of 100,000 yen a month in order to allow them to attend these courses. The conditions to the criteria for receiving this help are to have income of less than 80,000 yen, total family income of less than 150, and compulsory attendance at the course. Job seekers receive training at private centers that are accredited by the ministry, and the length of training is 3 to 6 months. There are 2 types of course: the basic course for basic capacity for all kinds of professional levels, and then practices where basic skills and practical skills are required. Training and business abilities, IT abilities, accounting are considered. Now I'm going to talk about training based on what we call employment cards. This is a system with people that don't have a lot of experience in regular employment and want to get a job. And on the basis of these data on this card, professional or vocational, combined vocational training is offered including practical training at the company and theoretical training at the same time. And to get this training, it's necessary to have been hired by a company, which requires going to an interview, and after training, the worker gets a graduation sheet whose contents are included on the employment card, so that that is used as a CV when continuing to seek for a job. The next system is training aimed at non-regular workers who have not had the opportunity to develop professional skills. The length of training is more than 3 months and less than 6 months, and in this latter case, 425 hours of training must be undertaken. The next system is called practical or practices training. It's to train basic human resources, people between 15 and 45 years of age, and planned training lasting for between 3 months and 2 years is offered, with more than 250 hours a year. The next training system is for young people. That's aimed at non-regular workers of less than 35, and the aim is to give them a job in the company, and that is between 2 months and 2 years, with more than 130 hours training a month. This card I haven't given detailed explanations about, but page 27 of the PowerPoint presentation shows you. Can we see page number 27 on the screen? This explains about the job card. This is an archive that contains the personal history, experience at work, past jobs, professional experience, and then the reason why the person wants a job, the professional, the past history, and this allows people to know what the level of the candidate is, and facilitates employment of the person who goes seeking a job. Let's go back to the training system for employees. The Central administration and provincial administration organize short courses, training courses, 2 to 5 days for employees in order to acquire abilities and knowledge that is necessary for the performance of their job. This is page 24. And they organize courses that are adapted to the needs of the companies and are financed by companies themselves. On page 24, which was on the screen, you could see the distribution of how the system, professional vocational training system, is made up. On the next slide, you see public vocational training programs. The number of people who get public employment training is 268,000 people. The rate of successful employment of these people is between 79% and 99%, which is quite high. Finally, I wanted to explain how at Rango we consider or what we think about vocational training. The development of vocational and professional abilities is important to guarantee jobs, and we should therefore strengthen and improve the system to develop professional skills and strengthen the role of vocational training programs organized by the state, and improving it with the participation of trade unions to further develop the system. When I mentioned, or the general school that I mentioned before, in that school there is participation by our members, the Rango Federation members, representatives of the trade unions, and also our representatives are present on the Committee for the Development of Employment Abilities. That includes the Ministry for Work, Employment and Health among the institutions. Second point, we should try to develop professional abilities and skills for everybody who wants to work.
Regardless of their being regular or non-regular workers, or active or non-active workers. Above all, we need to strengthen public initiatives that benefit young people and irregular workers in line with the central government's policy on the development of professional qualification. Thirdly, we need to make sure that the employment card system is known by everyone. It is our duty to make sure that workers actually benefit from this training, and we should put forward initiatives to improve working conditions for non-regular workers. Fourth, in collaboration with a central, local or regional administration and in collaboration with professional training entities, we should redress gaps amongst different regions or amongst different companies. We should remove those gaps. Those who live in regions where there are limited training possibilities or SME workers should receive an additional support. Fifth, it's also necessary to review the curricula of those training initiatives to improve the qualification of active workers and job seekers, taking into account the technology innovations, the change in the industrial fabric, and the needs of each company to provide high-quality training to those who actually need it, in line with companies' needs. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Muchas gracias por su.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Nagumo. I have a question for Mr. Nagumo, because there's something I didn't quite understand. I'll give you an example. Let's say that we have a worker. So, I have some questions to ask you, if I may. There's something that I didn't fully understand. Let's say that we have someone who has a job, a worker. Is there a possibility for that worker to receive training by the company or by the government? If so, training provided by companies is free of charge, but training provided by public entities is not free of charge. I'd like you to clarify that, because I'm not very sure what kind of training you are supposed to pay for.
先ほど少し
As I was saying before, a company's worker or employee, someone who works for a company, may be trained by the company itself. I mean, they'll all receive that kind of OJT on the job training. However, if that worker loses his job or wishes to change jobs, he or she may require additional training, in which case there are different alternatives based on the worker's specific situation or on the job seeker's specific situation.
Gracias.
Well, thank you very much. So, with regards to that, if I'm trained by my own company, let's say that I work for a company. So, if I work for a company, the company will provide me with on-the-job training, internal training. But you did mention before that people from outside the company, from a similar company in the same sector, may also benefit from this training. Perhaps I misunderstood you. You did tell us that in these internal training efforts, we could perhaps provide training to people who don't work for that company. Well, perhaps it was my mistake. I didn't make it sufficiently clear in my presentation. Let's say that I'm working for a company. I'm an employee of company X. And that company provides training to their workers. If a worker switches companies and starts to work for a different company, he or she may be trained by the second company. But a worker, we do know that Japanese companies have mostly been very successful. And this has a lot to do with Confucian thoughts and the consensus idea in Japan. There's an agreement between the company employing the worker and the worker who gives his life to the company. There's an exchange there. The worker knows that he'll be receiving training from the company, that the company will take care of him, that it will provide him with social benefits, it will provide him or her with a house. They will also support the education of their children, and if they die or if they fall ill, the company will take care of the worker's family. I mean, which sounds very strange for a Westerner. In Japan, as you well know, hierarchy is a tremendously important factor in all companies. I mean, hierarchy is very important. There's a small, short story by Natalie Holm about a Japanese company. According to, I mean, apparently, order and discipline are tremendously important for Japanese companies who value balance above anything else. They don't like any ripples in the pond, so to speak. I've always been fascinated with Japanese companies and the way they operate and work. So I have a question to ask you. In the past, employee promotion and training was based on their seniority, the number of years they had in the company. What's going to happen now? Because we have two different criteria. The traditional criterion that rewards people's time in the company and loyalty. And then on the other hand, we have people who are fresh out of the university who are now being hired because they've been properly trained for innovation. So how are you going to make these two worlds compatible? These two systems, how are they going to coexist? And something else that regarding unemployment in Japan, you've quoted 3.4% as the unemployment rate. 3.4% unemployment is considered to be full employment, structurally speaking. So how come you're so concerned with unemployment? This is something I've never been able to understand. A country with only 3.4% unemployment, this is considered, structurally speaking, full employment. So these are my two questions. Why are you so concerned with this tiny unemployment rate? And how are you going to make it possible for these two different systems to coexist together? According to our traditional philosophy, I mean, after the Second World War, a new way of managing companies was developed that is now subject to many different changes. And as we've just heard, in the past, if you were hired by a Japanese company, you knew that you would have unemployment for life in exchange of your loyalty and obedience. So you would have a job for life. That was the way to get your foot into the company's door. But this is no longer the case. The situation has changed. There is a new policy now in place. So, employee recruitment has changed. And companies now have, in the labor market, we now have a high number of non-regular workers and a decreasing number of regular employees. So there's a lot of uncertainty regarding your retirement. The system is unsustainable, considering the aging of the Japanese population, the change in the demographic pyramid. And based on that, we are deploying a whole new system, a brand new system for corporate management. Under this system, the company will no longer take care of your housing and education, the education of your children, and so on and so forth. Under this new system, companies won't be offering that much to workers. Houses in Spain are very, very large, 2 or 3 times as large as Japanese apartments, which are mostly very, very tiny, very small. So when you retire, it's usually when you've paid your house, your mortgage. So the situation has become more difficult. We pay a lot of money for tiny apartments that take forever to be paid. However, the system has changed. Young people have a different philosophy. They're more open-minded, and we have to align ourselves with these new trends. So how are we going to go about providing training to these people? Well, all the different stakeholders, the government, trade unions, and employers should devise some strategies to increase the added value, to be able to offer more added value. It is a problem that required a new piece of legislation in line with new trends and situations. And regarding the unemployment rate, I did mention the issues with women. They get married, they raise their families, and they miss out on many active years in the labor market. So statistical data usually overlook women when it comes to estimating the unemployment rate, because there are many women who don't wish to work. However, should they be interested in a job, if they're willing to work and can't find a job, we would have a much higher unemployment rate. Okay. In the Western world, we tend to believe that the Japanese economic miracle towards the end of the 20th century was based on a very specific corporate model, which was based on highly stable companies with a strong commitment between companies and workers, lifelong employment, and so on and so forth. However, based on the information you've shared with us, something is changing in that model. Apparently, you have an increasing number of non-regular workers. And you've also mentioned something I found very interesting, the fact that young generations have a different mindset regarding labor relations with your employer. So I have a question. The US crisis was mainly a financial crisis. And in Europe, our economic crisis has to do with our productive model. So what about the Japanese crisis? Is it a crisis that has to do with a change in the company model or paradigm? A profound change in the way companies are organized and the way companies work. The Japanese system is a very peculiar system indeed. I own up to this fact. Companies grow and generate added value, which is assessed by consumers. So the relationship between employees and employers was always based on a common objective. They collaborated to improve things, to get something better, or more productive, or more competitive, or with higher added value. However, the model is now changing. It is being transformed, and we have an increasing number of non-regular workers. And in the face of this situation, companies can no longer expect or demand the same from employees. In the past, employees were willing to give their love and their hard work to companies. But this is no longer the case. I mean, that commitment is waning. But we should try to turn the situation around. I mean, non-regular workers should also be loyal to the company employing them, and sooner or later they should be part of the company's payroll. So little by little, it is our duty to build a system where these non-regular workers can become regular workers, entitled to a whole host of services and benefits. Well, both in the US and Europe, the crisis has been very hard. And also in Japan, we are actually speaking about 2 lost decades. So, for companies to, I mean, since the economy wasn't growing, the level of activity was very low for many years, and this has undermined the relations between employees and employers. These idle or inactive years. I understand this is not easy to understand if you come from a different country, from a different continent, a different culture. To increase productivity in Japan, we follow a set of principles, 3 principles, which were agreed on back in 1957. They were agreed on by employers and employees. It is a set of principles aiming at boosting productivity. So as part of this concept, so as not to increase the unemployment rate, employees could switch jobs or locations within the same company. The aim was always the same, not to increase unemployment. So employers and trade unions have always worked hand in hand to improve the company's productivity. And then the results obtained thanks to the efforts deployed by the company and by the employees are shared equally and fairly. This is one of the most important principles guiding our development in the past 50 years. However, during the last decades, this third principle, the equitable distribution of earnings or wealth, has been overlooked, is no longer respected. And those who've invested in the stock exchange market, those who wished to speculate, after a lot of speculation, this balance was broken. It collapsed. So my trade union, Rengo, in the face of a patent improvement amongst Japanese companies, we have fought very hard to improve working conditions for company workers or employees. Good morning. I'd like to thank you for your very interesting presentation, which I have found quite fascinating. You've mentioned that you now have an increasing number of temporary or non-regular workers. You've also mentioned that in the past, employees and employers were very loyal to each other, that on-the-job training has always been based on this premise, that a lot of money has been invested in training because companies understood that there would be a return of that investment. What is the impact of these temporary workers on the way companies manage training? Are they still investing heavily on training? Or have they chosen to offer shorter training courses to their workers in the face of this situation? Has it changed? Well, regarding your question, I'd like to say the following. After these two last decades, we've seen that companies are investing less in human resource development and also in other areas. However, our Prime Minister's policy has changed the situation, and companies are now investing more on training. This three-pronged policy by the Prime Minister has to do with employees, with workers. So as a trade union, it is our duty to deploy structure that fosters the training of new recruits.
Sí, señor Nagumo-san.
Yes, Mr. Nagumo, thank you very much for your presentation. Japan is probably the most advanced country in the world technologically. I would like to ask you what is the weight and how of that technology in training, how important it is. And the second question is, how does the Japanese government look at the future in terms of the aging of the Japanese population and the future requirements for training?
はい、一つ目の技術的なことにつきましては、
As regards the first question, technology and training, I would like to say that society is becoming older. Yes, this is a fact, but there is a critical mass of population born just after the Second World War that has now, well, yes, reached 60, 65 years of age, the boomers, or the equivalent of the boomers. And these people have a lot of knowledge of technology, and they have a high level of ability. We have to really try to make use of the huge amount of knowledge and abilities of those people. I don't mean to say that that everything is perfect in Japan, but as years go by, we know that people become more responsible and develop much more knowledge, abilities, and therefore higher responsibilities. And but things have changed a bit now. Things have sped up, and it's all become much more difficult. The old structure has changed. And it's much more difficult in traditional companies to train people like it used to be. It's more difficult. Before, people used to gradually move up the scale professionally within the company, but today that is changing, and things are getting more and more competitive, even at global level. And that is obviously a new challenge, and we're going to have to really develop a new system to face up to this challenge. And we cannot just go by results at work and outcomes at work. If we have a product, when that product is sold, and some consumers might buy that product straight away, but others are much more critical, and they appraise it and reappraise it. It's much more difficult. Everything is much more difficult. You cannot judge an employee's performance by the way a product actually sells on the market later. We have to, therefore, introduce new ways of evaluating and assessing performance. We've got to introduce new ways of assessing, as I say, the work of employers and the employees and the performance of employees, which reflects what our principles are. At the Ministry for Employment, Health and Welfare, there is a tripartite council, and we discuss, we have many discussions on the new systems for training. Good, we're going to finish. We have 3 questions. I'm going to be very specific. Japan is going to increase its population of over 60 people that are over 65 by 21 million in 15 years. In Spain, we have a similar problem. People are getting older, but we have much less industrial power. How do you address this problem in Japan? What is said in Japan to face up to this problem? Well, as I said before, we are making use of the workforce, women. It's very important, and women have dropped out of employment traditionally to take care of their children, and when they finally when the children are old enough to go to school, they usually go back to work. Now, for them, it's very difficult now to find another regular job, and we've got to change that. In Japan, there's a saying: men should work out of the home, and women should work within the home. Now, this is a very, very deeply rooted in Japanese society, but we've got to change that. Maybe men will have to stay at home, and women go out to work. That would be a very good idea, actually. There's a place called Jikumen, or a trend, a fashion now called Jikumen, of men who are changing their habits and trends, and we must change the social attitudes in this respect.
Sí, muchas gracias, señor Nagumo. La verdad es que es muy interesante todo lo que nos está usted contando. Siempre tenemos que tener presente.
Well, there are I'll repeat. Thank you very much, Mr. Nagumo. It's very, very interesting what you're saying. We must always bear in mind the enormous cultural differences that explain behaviors that are different in different societies, Japan and Spain. And I admire Japan. I'm delighted. I love your technology, your cars, your watches, your cameras, and, well, much else. And I love the institutional loyalty in Japan, the ability that people have, employers and workers have of debating and talking to each other. And the presence of Japan in the world is admirable. I think that we always come across mental mindsets and problems that have to do with mindsets. We are here to talk about training. I think it's been very interesting, but I think we haven't quite understood. When you talk about non-regular workers or employees, you're talking about what in Spain we call temporary workers. Now, from the data you've given us, I think you said 66% of workers in Japan are regular. That is, people who have an indefinite contract. In Spain, that's 73%. However, we are a country where we understand that the rate of temporary employment is too high. And that is why we think it's very interesting to see how two countries look at the problem differently. I would like to have your unemployment rate, although we can only talk about data and figures, that are calculated here in a different way from the way you calculate them. But going back to training, in Spain we don't have that tradition of differentiating clearly training that is given to workers, fixed workers or regular workers, from non-regular workers, at least not institutionally so. I think that from experiences like this, we can learn a lot. Unfortunately, we don't have the time, but there are things that you've said that I have found very interesting. The way that companies are central to the training that is given workers at companies, something which is we're trying to do in Spain, and another topic which you have mentioned, which is this letter of employment or charter of employment for training. The differences that are established between two countries, a kind of halfway house between the training check and the system in Spain. I would have to explain, and we haven't got the time, but it would be similar to what we have in Spanish legislation. What I do think is important is that you try to explain to us why there are these conceptual differences in the training that you give definite workers and the training that you give non-regular workers, and only regular workers get the contribution to Social Security and what have you. In our tradition, legally, we cannot distinguish between one and the other. So I would like to clarify, for you to clarify these things. Thank you very much. In the case of Japan, for a long time, in Japan, for a long time, we have had social debate and dialogue between trade unions and employers, and in this context, employees of companies have always thought about the well-being of their employees, and they've always tried to add value and produce things that at the same time consumers wanted to buy. And I think that this philosophy is not going to change a lot in the future. As regards what we call non-regular employment, what you call temporary employment, short-term employment, when we refer to temporary work, for instance, we could talk about married women who work for a few hours a day. That's our idea of part-time employment. But currently, even recent graduates from university cannot get a job at companies or in companies. And there are graduates that also do part-time work and temporary work. They cannot get a definite full-time, permanent, regular job in a company. And that's a problem that we now have in Japan. When it comes to rounding off income for families, a part-time job is okay. If you're talking about rounding off and adding or getting some extra money, but people that are young, less than 30 years of age, who don't have a definite job, they can't get married, they can't have children, that population is increasing. People who need a permanent job, and we've got to try to increase the wages of these workers, of these temporary workers and part-time workers. And as regards this, the government is also trying to find solutions in tripartite conversations and negotiations in terms of vocational training. As we've said, there is temporary work. In the case of SMEs that don't have trade unions that defend the interests of workers, there are only very few SMEs that have a trade union. So they only respect the minimum, the bare minimum, and only comply with the bare legal minimum. So we at the Confederation of Trade Unions have to defend the workers in that sector too. These people, these employees, must get professional vocational training in order to improve their professional outlook. And we are trying to help these people with, for instance, the job card system, including their curriculum, their CV, their professional history, and we make use of these data to give them better possibilities. An example of loyalty and cooperation, but I want to apologize because it seems that I have been misinterpreted and I'm very sorry. Well, thank you. We're going to lunch very soon.
Hola, buenos días.
Good morning, or good afternoon, actually. I want to ask you about training. I wanted to ask, in the older people's schools, where I understand older people go to train, or people that don't have work, are they offered a series of sets of skills and abilities to seek work? What type of training do they actually specifically get?
それは先ほど
Well, as I've said, and I showed you a slide. There's a shorter course and a longer 2-year course, and there are older people who want to start a job or find a job or train again, retrain. What type of training can we offer these people? Well, we are now perfecting the type of training we give these people financially. The situation of these people is not very good sometimes, and in those cases we have to help them to find a job. But we offer this system, this possibility, and we should and we offer them everything we can in these courses.
En principio no hay más palabras.
There are no more questions. We are late, so I just want to thank Mr. Nagumo for his presentation, his generosity, which have allowed